problem.
Thank you. You have 5 minutes, and please let me know when you're ready.
I am ready.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. My name is Kojo Damptey, and I'm representing the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion. We are proud to be part of the Just Recovery Hamilton collective. We support all the recommendations set out by the collective, some of which I'll be speaking to today. Recommendations 70 to 75 deal with tackling systemic racism. These recommendations come from the historical realities and experiences of racialized communities in Hamilton and across this country. I am reminded of 1929 and 1930 when prominent Hamilton businessmen William Phillips and Ernest Taylor, both Klansmen who went to Oakville to burn down a cross in protest against Isabel Jones's marriage to Ira Johnson, a racialized man. After their despicable act, the Oakville chief of police at the time, David Kerr, gave them a police escort back to Hamilton. This incident is the reality of systemic racism, hate, and xenophobia in Hamilton and this country. This incident sparked Rabbi Eisendras to say many people publicly oppose the Klan's lawlessness, but at the same time are silently condoning the work of which the Klan seeks to achieve. This silence condoning is what causes people to shout, "All lives matter." This silent condoning is what causes Indigenous women to lose their lives at a hospital when they are in pain. This silent condoning allows racialized populations, healthcare workers, and people living with low income to be disproportionately affected by COVID. This silent condoning is allowing white supremacist groups like Proud Boys to organize here in Hamilton. This silent condoning dismisses Indigenous women and queer folks who work to protect the water. It is not enough to go back to normal. Many Black, Indigenous, people of color residents are calling for immediate action to address systemic racism. We cannot continue to depend on people's benevolence to address systemic racism. If we are to do so, the health and well-being of racialized communities is going to be at risk. Thus, it's important for the city of Hamilton to commit a portion of its city's operational and capital budget to the urban indigenous strategy, which you have approved. It is important to provide funding to the Sisters in Spirit Committee of Hamilton and to commit to the 231 calls for justice from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry Report. It's important to fund specific under-resourced racialized communities to meet their own social, educational, health, and civic needs. It's important in the middle of a pandemic to restructure the Board of Health, of Public Health's membership, to include members of the public from the following equity-seeking groups, such as women, people living with visible disabilities, Indigenous peoples, low-income communities, and Black and racialized communities. Lastly, it's important to commit to an anti-oppression and anti-racism fund that supports anti-racism work done by various community organizations here in Hamilton. A just recovery for Hamilton must focus on the communities in the city that are experiencing the pandemic's disproportionate negative effects. We cannot meet the profound inequity and hidden challenges that the current pandemic has exposed with fear and austerity. Together, together in a meaningful way, as we have modeled with this Just Recovery collective, we can build Hamilton to be a better city, not just for a few, but for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Damptey. Are there any questions of the delegate? Okay. Councillor Nan.
Thank you. Through the Deputy Mayor, thank you, Kojo, for being here. I wanted to ask a question as it relates to recommendation 74. And again, I've mentioned it before. Thank you to all the coalition members who put together the Just Recovery recommendations, over 100 and something for us as a council to consider. 74 talks about restructuring the membership of the Board of Health to include members of the public and specifically from equity-seeking groups. I believe this is the first time council is hearing about this. Can you speak a little bit about why?
Yeah, so this recommendation is not new. The Toronto Board of Public Health has that set up. I think when we look at the current pandemic facing Hamilton, as all of you received in the October public Board of Public Health reports that showed that COVID is affecting racialized communities, low-income communities. So the point here is, if you have members of the public from these equity-seeking groups sitting on the Board of Public Health, they will be able to provide that perspective to what are the critical health issues facing various communities. We're looking right now in Hamilton, we're talking about a vaccine rollout. Well, if you had members of equity-seeking groups, those members would be able to support with the vaccine rollout, whether it's to long-term care facilities, residential facilities, or even those neighborhoods. We have in Hamilton specific neighborhoods in specific wards that have a high density of specific racialized communities and also ethno-cultural communities. If we have a connection to a public board of health through those communities, then we'll be able to get that information to them in a robust way that allows for us not to always exclude people when we're talking about their health. So that is the reason behind that recommendation, and I think that would definitely help to address some of the social determinant of health outcomes that we see across our city.
I thank you, and I also thank you for the account of the historical incident at the beginning of your delegation. Stark sometimes to hear our history, but I think important because it does indicate the degree to which we've been dealing with many of these issues, and specifically specifically dealing with racism and the presence of white supremacy in our city that often doesn't get spoken of. Thank you for your time and for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further questions of the delegate. Thank you, Mr. Damptey, for being here this afternoon.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Members of council, we're going to return to 6.1.